So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce Sophie. Sophie is our Director of Data and Technology Products, who is here to talk to us about enhanced customer experience and how utilizing data and developing a great data strategy can really help you to accelerate the profitability and growth of your business.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you ever so much for having me. I'm very pleased that the customer experience of getting over that style was managed. So, we have hugely high expectations, and they are continuing to grow. Over the last 5 years, we have seen the number of location-based searches increase 34 times. The number of requests for same-day shipping has doubled in the last 3 years. And last year, a survey of customers for the CMO survey, over half of the customers said key for them for exceptional service was a really fast response time. But the gap between expectation and reality continues to grow. If you ever have a few spare minutes, I encourage you to look for the expectation reality baking meme. This is my personal favorite. It will kill a couple of hours. So to close that gap, we've been talking about this for years and years. We have spoken about customer experience, customer service, design, product features. But at the center of all of that is the assumption that we know what our consumers expect. And it's at this point that I would like us all to take a bit of a figurative step back and say, do we actually know what our consumers want? Now, we can ask them, and that's incredibly important and incredibly powerful. But if you have a large consumer base, giving all of them a phone call is probably going to take a little bit more time and resources than you have. And this is where our data can become our absolute competitive advantage. If we have structured our data in a way that means we can start to mine it and we can start to get some insights, we can start to really get under the skin of what our consumers expect and go beyond what they're telling us and actually look at what they're thinking. The analogy that I would give you, and this is perhaps not good to announce in a room full of people, I will never own up outside of this room to being a massive aficionado of Millionaire Matchmaker. It is not a work-appropriate TV show to watch. It is definitely not meeting, the women's lib, feminist type ideals, but it is quality viewing. But I would never ever tick a form that says I'm watching that. My data, on the other hand, will tell you that that was what I was watching last night. So our data, hugely, hugely, hugely important. So step one on this journey, we need to get our house in order. What do we know so far? You probably do have some data on your consumers. You can probably measure what they're expecting, how they're reacting, what they're feeling. And you can start to build that 360 view. That is a couple of slides away, that's a couple of steps away, but you do know stuff about your consumers. And if you know that, you can then start to build a strategy. What don't we know? What more do we need to know? What more do we need to find out? And at that point, we can then embrace all of the amazing technological advances that we have to actually then drive that forward and deliver on those goals. But we need to be really pragmatic. So that data-first business strategy, as Pete said, it's crucial, it's critical, and it has to be for everyone. Data is central to what we do. Whether you're marketing, whether you're finance, whether you're product, whether you're the CEO, whether you're on reception, whether you're cleaning, it's absolutely crucial because you're reading, you're understanding, you're seeing what is out there. And tools and technology can help us to harness it, can help us bring it together. But we also need to think about how our people will react, how our customers will react. Where do we need to be and why? And a good data strategy will bring all of those bits together. It will be supported by resilient processes that actually work. And it's all hugely interlinked, which is why it gets a little bit scary. Don't discount at this stage the importance of gut feeling. The data can say one thing, you might feel another thing. Delve into that, see what else you can understand. But just having a lot of choice doesn't mean you need to be paralyzed. It also doesn't mean we need to have a corporate Game of Thrones. I don't need you all to go and storm the IT department, take down the data center. Start somewhere sensible. And that somewhere sensible, hopefully, is the somewhere that will have the biggest impact and is the somewhere that is within your control. So it might be media buying. It might be actually as the owner of the CRM system, you can start to think about your contact strategy. You can start to think about the things that you're asking your consumers about. But you do need to start somewhere. Don't be paralyzed by the fear of moving forward. So how do you start to identify them more? How do you start to think about what it is that you need to know? A good data strategy, I think, will allow you to answer 3 questions. The first is, do we understand what's going on? The second is, do we understand why? And then the third is, knowing that, can I actually do something about it? And if we don't know, then we need to ask ourselves, does knowing that mean that we can drive value? And if by solving that question, are we doing it in a way that is future-proof? So for example, is it GDPR compliant? What's our view on where cookies will be? What's our view on what we can do with device IDs? What's our view on whether the robot apocalypse is coming and actually we should be talking to the computers and not the people? And then you need to articulate the value of doing it. If we're building a data strategy, that's probably going to involve some work and that's going to need funding. So we need to be able to articulate why. Why is this important? So as an example, maybe we understand a what. Maybe we know that our click-through rate is 10%. Marvelous. Do we know why? Probably not. Can we do anything with that? Probably not either. So what do we need to capture next? What extra bits of information do we need? It might be that we need to now start capturing the content type. So maybe the click-through rate is higher on videos versus a banner, let's say. Maybe we need to capture the call to action. Have we actually asked anybody to click on it? And if we know that, then what can we do? Well, we can optimize to a content type. We can optimize to a type of call to action. We can maybe rebrief creative agencies to think about different formats, different types of representation. And then does knowing that, does it actually drive any value? Well, if you have on-site conversion, there's probably some sort of formula you can start to derive. Maybe we know that each visit converts with X% likelihood with Y pounds of average value. So if we're increasing our click-through rate by 1%, we can then probably infer a revenue increase. And are we doing it in a future-proof way? And this is a bit where people often forget to challenge themselves. Are we finding this piece of information out in a way that we can scale and a way that we can continue to deliver? So have we forced processes to be better? Have we captured that data in a well-ordered database, or is there some poor person back at the ranch having to tie together the data sets in a spreadsheet? And if you can answer all of those, then that's probably a piece of information you should be going out and you should be seeking, and it's probably helping you write your business case. And this is the bad news section of this presentation. What you can plug in really, really depends. You want to go out, you want to get the best technology. I think with most things, if you're trying to buy something, you want it to be the best that you can get. But what you can put in absolutely depends on the infrastructure that you currently have in place. So these 4 kind of high-level ways you can structure your technology come from the marvelous Scott Brinker. And he says there are 4 main types. The first is a suite. Now, that doesn't really exist because it's the idea that one type of technology can do absolutely everything, whether it's your enterprise systems, whether it's CRM, whether it's marketing. The next is a platform where you've got one at the center but has got some really good integrations going off. So you might be thinking about perhaps something like Microsoft, which can do your enterprise applications like Excel, PowerPoint. It's got finance systems, it's got CRM systems, does a whole host of stuff. You can plug stuff in. Next, and what sort of comes up most often for most legacy businesses, is a multi-platform system. So you might have Microsoft doing your business applications, you might have Google doing all of your marketing, you might have some Adobe doing some of your MarTech, and they all hopefully hang together. And then finally, which is what most people would like to do, but unfortunately is really hard to do, is what's called a bus, where at the center, we're thinking about a data spine, thinking about something consistent that can tie all of this together, and we're then bringing in lots of other bits of technology, lots of other integrations. So multi-platform is probably what you're doing because most businesses are legacy businesses in some ways. I worked for BT for a number of years, and the thought of changing out any IT system filled the entire building with horror. For them, moving beyond multi-platform wasn't on the pipeline, wasn't on the roadmap for years and years and years. Whereas working with some other organizations with a startup, actually it's so flexible that you can plug stuff in when you want. So invest in the technology that will deliver your strategy, that is affordable and will fit within your existing ecosystem so that you can start to actually get some benefit as soon as possible. So focus on the areas that will add value first. Is it a data management platform? Is it the data lake? Is it the raw ingredients from which you're going to be deriving insights, from which you're going to be driving things like machine learning and automation that Rahul and Caroline will be talking about later? And if you've done that, the world is your oyster, or a smiley robot. We can think about sequential messaging. We can think about actually building a 360-degree view of the consumer so that we truly know in a non-creepy way what they're thinking, what they're feeling, and how we should react to them. Get your foundations in, and then you can do some immensely cool stuff. So we've got our data, we have our data strategy, and that's not where this journey finishes. The next thing we need to think about is actually what's the point of that data? How can we use it to actually drive some insight? One of the key takeaways I would like you to take from this session is that interesting isn't always useful. So I think it's incredibly interesting that in the US, every time a Nicolas Cage film comes out, deaths in swimming pools increase. So maybe it is quite useful, don't go swimming in the US if there's a Nicolas Cage film, but it's not really very useful for me from a day-to-day point of view. This is not about getting the new shiny toy. It's about aligning what we're trying to find out to our business strategy so that we can action it. I'm just going to pause here very, very quickly to think about big data. A lot of data doesn't mean you have big data. Big data typically means unstructured. It's something we can mine, it's something we probably need to harness some of the machine learning techniques to start to bring it together. And it gives us incredible insight, incredible amounts of power and things that we can do, but not very many people have that. And to give some confidence on that point, the NHS, one of the examples that we often think of with big data, and they're not quite there yet either. For this talk, I was doing a bit of research around actually where the NHS has got to with the whole big data thing. And I'm actually going to have to check my notes here so that I get the right names of the organisations. This will become very obvious why in a second. So, the National Institute for Health Research Health Informatics Collaborative, also known as the NIHRHIC, is a program that has been set up, and it is pulling together data from 5 of the big NHS trusts. And they have spent years and years and years mapping data to a common core. So this is the NHS, which has oodles of data, but a lot of the case studies that you'll read is actually about getting bits of that big data with which they can do stuff. So the NIHRHIC, mapping that data to give access for researchers. There's another brilliant acronym, the PHED-DLP, which is basically ambulances. They've been mapping data from ambulances arriving at emergency departments and seeing what the outcomes are. And from that, they can start to infer, actually, maybe some cases should be treated in the community rather than taken to hospital. The Leeds NHS Trust has been doing a project with a procedure that I cannot pronounce, but basically it's removing gallstones. And they used an algorithm to predict the length of stay in hospitals. Now, the idea of that is that if we know how long someone will be in a hospital, we can plan the non-urgent appointments operations a bit better. And if we are planning operations a bit better, if they're not being cancelled, it's more cost efficient, it's a better patient outcome. And they managed to get down to a 5-point model that with 95% accuracy could predict how long someone would need a hospital bed. So some really, really interesting applications of big data, but again, resting on the foundation of having consistent data structures that can be mined for that level of insight. So for most people, data is large-ish. There is a lot of it. I'm not trying to belittle the size of the task that we're all faced with, but we're talking about really very large data as opposed to big data. So as an example, one of our clients, an optician group, are starting to use some of the data science techniques to mine their data sets. They've got something like 750 stores across the UK, and using a combination of Google Cloud Platform, BigQuery, Google Analytics, they started to look at some of the behaviors on their site. They were particularly interested in driving more people to book eye test appointments online on their website. And said, okay, how can we do this? What do we know? So using GA to see how people are clicking through, what they're looking at, what appointments they're booking, but then harnessing all of that data across their 750 stores, years worth of appointments, to start to build some models to understand what was going on. And what they found was that if there was next day availability for an appointment, they'd have something a bit over 50% conversion rate. It's about 55%. If someone had to wait a week, that plummeted to about 37%. And if they had to wait 2 weeks, it went down to under 30%. So that's really interesting, really helpful. We have quite a clear strategy that we can follow from that. We need to have more next day availability on our appointment booking service. Fantastic. So the edict went out. Local stores got told by head office they absolutely had to have more store availability, which they did. Head office was checking, and they were checking. They thought, yep, all of these stores have next day availability, but their appointment bookings weren't really improving. They said, well, why is that? Went to the next level, and they worked out that the local stores were gaming the system. And what they were doing was they were releasing one appointment for the next day because they knew that head office was checking, but they still wanted to control the booking process, so everybody else still had to call up. And what that is showing is that the data will get us so far. We then need to start to account for human behavior and people being very awkward and very change resistant. But fortunately, the data was structured in such a way that it could then be looked at in that way and say it's not about having one appointment the next day. Well done for at least hitting that milestone. It's about having availability for all of our customers. And that's great. We've got all of this data. But we now need people who can read it. This can't be in the hands of the few. It needs to be available for everyone. And that means that we need to build data literacy. The analogy that I often give here is that if I was to put a load of sheet music on the screens around, a number of people could probably read that, and I could probably embarrass them and ask them to sing the song to me. But if I wrote out the letters of the notes, more people could probably do that. If I sung to you, which would be painful for everyone, you could then probably sing back to me. It's about making sure that we communicate in the right language to the people who need this data. And then finally, collaboration is absolutely key. There'll be pockets of data in your businesses that you perhaps don't realize just how rich they are. As one example, we worked with a pension provider and realized that some of the emails that were being sent, they just weren't resonating. And they brought in, as one of the people we spoke to, the lady who ran their contact center. And it turned out she actually knew most of the reasons why emails were bouncing. It was unclear messaging. It was that people were clicking through and it wasn't going to the right page on the website. They couldn't find the information they needed. But because that feedback loop wasn't there, the marketing team in the contact center were just getting a bit cross at each other for not fixing what they thought was quite obvious. And one final sort of example here, thinking about how you get those messages across, is perhaps learning how to change a tire. It's probably easier to watch a YouTube video to understand how to change a tire because you can watch and you can learn than it is reading it from a book. So data for everyone, a common language, and making sure you're collaborating to share those data points. So we've got our data strategy, we have our technology, we know what the point is that we're actually doing this is. And then step 3 is making sure that we're actually preparing for change. The world is changing fast. For those of you who don't know who this lady is, this is Kylie Kardashian, another guilty pleasure to go along with Millionaire Matchmaker. I do watch other stuff, I promise. The world is changing really, really quickly. Kylie Kardashian sent a tweet out at the end of February saying that she thought Snapchat wasn't all that in a bag of chips. Depending on how you measure it, it wrote something like £1 billion, sorry, £1 billion, 1 point something billion dollars off the value of Snapchat because Kylie Kardashian doesn't like it. Now, I aspire to that level of power, but I guess the point here is that the fact that that much power resides in one person, for a technology that didn't exist in 2011, to be able to have £1 billion wiped off it, the world is changing really, really fast. And how we are able to respond to internal change, how we are able to set ourselves up for success, will mean how readily we are able to pivot and respond to the changes in our consumers. Approach business change with a plan. Like, there is no right way, I'm afraid. There is no blueprint that I can give you. There is definitely a wrong way. So make sure that your ways of working are nailed. Make sure you have a vision. Make sure you have the right kit. And make sure that when you are deploying change, it is focused and that someone is leading the charge. And then finally, on the theme of change, expect your customers to change. They are getting ever different. They are getting ever more demanding. And one story to leave you on, my stepmother used to work for Amazon. So when Amazon was still really only selling books in the UK, and she said the point at which she knew she wanted to leave and not be there anymore was when people down the pub were starting to complain to her about how long it was taking to get stuff. So when she started, the British public were amazed that they could order a book and it would come through their letterbox a couple of days later. A few years down the line, people saying, well, I ordered next day delivery, it's not here. You personally are the worst. So expect your customers and their demands to change and be absolutely ready for that. So to summarize the 3 points that I hope have been made today, apart from my bad TV viewing habits, get your house in order. Data is absolutely the building block of how we operate, of how we make decisions, and of how we are able to quickly respond to the signals that we see in the marketplace. Build knowledge across the organization so that you can ask the right questions, whether it's within your marketing department, whether it's of another department, whether it's of your customers. And then finally, invest in the tools that actually allow you to respond to change. Don't invest in the shiny toy, as shiny and pretty as it may be. Invest in the stuff that will absolutely drive value to your business. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We've actually got time. We'll try and do this at the end of each talk if we're running to time, which we absolutely are so far. But Sophie's obviously here today, and this is a really key topic, as we talked about at the start. So we can just about, it's difficult from this position to sort of, you can make out various figures. So if I see hands going up, I'll try and point in that direction. But if anybody's got any questions that they'd like to ask Sophie and take this opportunity to delve into a little bit more detail, please, we'll take them from the floor now.
Stunned silence.
Yeah. Got to have one. Who's going to take the punt and be the first person to ask a question? Question over there.
Did you all hear that?
Yes, we got you so far.
So knowledge is key, and probably is, in all our businesses, is a constrainer for getting this right. Have you seen some really good examples of how clients or other businesses have delivered the level of knowledge that have made data and, probably more importantly, the actions from that data part of the DNA of an organisation?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to work out if I can tell you who they are, but let's see if I can give you enough hints. So in terms of what does good look like, the first thing I would say is that training, as tempting as it might be, one size doesn't fit all. And actually, what you need your people to know does vary from role to role. So where I've seen training deployed really effectively is working out what that common core is. And that might be as simple as making sure everyone knows what your product set is. I have worked in organizations where me included have gone, we do that. So what is the common core of knowledge that everyone needs to know? And then it's working out both the carrot and the stick for enforcing that being permeated through the organization. So is it mandatory online training? Stuff like data protection, probably quite a good idea. Is it stuff that is tied into people's objectives? Are we giving them the time and the headspace to be able to actually think about that? And then I guess sort of following on from that, it's then the processes that you put in place to make this become business as usual. So perhaps it's making sure that your data is visualized in an easily accessible way, so people aren't having to go and mine through huge numbers of spreadsheets to get to the answer. It's in an easily accessible place. Perhaps it is as simple as sharing a weekly email that has got some of those key metrics in it. And then it's the process of feeding that back and making change. I work with quite a few regulated companies where, as lovely as it would be to say, okay, we've seen this, therefore do this, it does just have to go through an approval process. So then it's making sure that you have the tramlines within which you can make those decisions, you can maneuver, and know what the process is to, if you have to, escalate and expedite it out of it. So it's a combination of training, process, and also just encouragement. You can get some hugely interesting things out of data if you have the headspace and the tools to go and find it and mine it. And I'm a great believer in if you can find those nuggets, those interesting things that kind of hook people in, that you will encourage people to understand, learn more, and go from there. Does that answer the question?
It does, thank you.
Brilliant. A little bit of time if there's any more questions. Come on, there's got to be another one somewhere. Somebody's got to have one that they're sat on that they'll wish when they get home tonight that they'd asked it. Nope. Okie doke, thank you very much. Cheers, Sophie, thank you.